Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about Ranger Suarez's 2024 season and why a lot of people have him as a potential trade candidate this offseason. Yeah, I don't think so.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is indeed Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, hitting that subscribe button on the YouTube, all that stuff that really helps us out on Locked On Phillies and helps you out. It gets you notifications when new episodes are posted on the YouTube when you hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing. It takes like 2 seconds, and it really helps me out here to keep putting out good content for you. So appreciate that. If you're not familiar with my work or some of my other work outside of Locked On Phillies, I've been on the radio, 97.5 The Fanatic here in Philadelphia, talking sports for 5 years now. I've been a 3-year credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member, and this is also my 3rd season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep the season going with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today, we're going to break down Ranger Suarez's 2024 season. This is a very up and down one, very interesting one to evaluate. We're also going to get into a conversation on why, despite rumors that he could be potentially traded and all these fan accounts that I see saying, oh, Ranger Suarez could be on the move, they could trade him, I'm going to tell you why the Philadelphia Phillies are not going to trade Ranger Suarez this offseason. But then to wrap up, we're going to talk about if this past year, 2024, if this is just the guy he's always going to be. Is that Ranger Suarez's career in a nutshell? We'll break all of it down. But let's start with the breakdown of his 2024 season. He ended with a 2.6 WAR, which sounds low considering how good he was at the start of the year. He won Pitcher of the Month. Threw a complete game shutout this year. I mean, he was pretty darn good in 2024, or at least in April and May and June of 2024. And then he had some injury issues, and then it looked like he got worn down a little bit near the end of the season. So he finished with a 3.46 ERA. He made 27 starts, which is not awful. Remember, we just lauded Aaron Nola in our last episode that you can go check out with his evaluation of 2024 for him making 32 plus starts. Now he did that for like 6 straight full seasons, but 27 ain't bad for Ranger Suarez. It's his second highest mark in his career for games started, behind only 2022, in which he started 29 games. But 27, I mean, that's short a couple. And 150 innings, well, that's 5 less than he had in 2022. So you want to see him get closer to 170, 175 innings, and that'll be 2 to 3 more starts, right? But part of doing that is going to be durability and remaining healthy. And that's a question for Ranger Suarez that we're going to get into in our final segment today. But the numbers don't look bad, right? He had 145 strikeouts. That's the most in his career. His strikeout stuff was really, really good. He was arguably, for like 3 months of the season, the best pitcher on planet Earth. And then he takes the comebacker off the arm and he misses a start. And then he has the back issues and he misses time in the middle of the season. So if he had remained healthy, that's a big if. But if he had remained healthy, I think the numbers would look significantly better for Ranger Suarez, and you have to account for that. Here's some places where he's been really consistent. Walks allowed, consistently decreasing in the past 3 seasons. 58 in 2022, 48 in 2023, and this past year, 41. His command, which has always been a calling card of Ranger Suarez's pitching ability, has been getting better. That's a great sign for a guy who, you might feel like he's been here a while. He's only 29. He's got plenty of time left pitching at the major league level. You're also looking at the numbers for home runs being remarkably consistent. Home runs allowed, 15 allowed in 2022, 13 allowed in 2023, 14 allowed in 2024. So he's going to be right around, 13 to 15 home runs allowed, it looks like, over the course of a season if he throws around 150 innings. And that's not a bad spot to be. That's because the guy keeps the ball down. He works ground ball outs. Ranger Suarez is very, very good at working the low part of the zone, the corners of the zone. His accuracy is really, really next level. That is one of the most elite things about Ranger Suarez, is he is just so darn accurate, and he produces such soft contact. We're going to talk about another guy in our next episode on Monday, Christopher Sanchez, who does the same. But we're talking about Ranger Suarez. Also, if you might be wondering like why I went with Ranger Suarez first and Christopher Sanchez we'll do after, because we're supposed to be going in rotational order. We're going based on the rotational order that started this season. So Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Sanchez, and then we'll get to everybody's favorite, Taijuan Walker. But anyway, back to Ranger. Like, those are some encouraging numbers. Consistency has not been a problem for him. The problem is the consistency that he has is, well, not a full season, not as available as other guys. This is why we talked about Aaron Nola in the way that we did on Thursday's episode. It was just like, it's so rare to see a pitcher available that readily, that often. And Ranger Suarez has not done that. Now, 2 years ago, it was the visa issue. And last year, it was the illness in spring training. And this year, well, he was healthy. He was good to go. He was ready to get the season started. And he went out there and he absolutely started off on a tear. It shows you what preparation can do for these players. And that's a great sign for Ranger Suarez going forward, that when he has the extra preparation, right? Think about how this year could have potentially gone. We know that he flamed out at the end and he kind of had the dead arm. We're going to talk about his playoff performance in a second too, because that is one of the most underrated parts of the season for the Philadelphia Phillies. But anyway, it'd be easy to say in 22 and 23, well, we just need Ranger healthy and available at the start of the season. And maybe he'll be this guy that we saw back in 2019 when he broke through and he threw, or rather 2021, when he threw 106 innings at a 2.72 ERA. Like, that was the, Ranger Suarez's good season. You thought you could have that guy if he was prepared and available. This year, that was proven correct. It could have been he goes to spring training healthy and ready and ends up not looking all that good to start the season. And then you say, oh, well, maybe it was just a blip on the radar, what he did in 2021. No, that's the guy that he can be when he's at his best. And there are very few baseball pitchers right now in major leagues that can go ahead and pitch at that level for the period that Ranger Suarez did this past year. So that's high marks, right? I have to evaluate that. And also, when it comes to the playoff performance of Ranger Suarez, making that start in the final game of the NLDS. I know the Phillies did not win that game, but my goodness, it was not because of Ranger Suarez. That dude worked out at jams. He didn't have his best stuff. He battled and battled and battled. And that is why Ranger Suarez is a high-level major league pitcher. Because when he doesn't have his best stuff, he's not giving up bombs. He's not loading the bases like crazy. He's not creating issues for himself. A lot of times when he doesn't have his best stuff, he's still pretty darn good. And even when he does get into those situations, like I was talking about, loading the bases, giving up some scattered hits, there is nobody better on this Philadelphia Phillies team than Ranger Suarez at working out of a jam. There just isn't. Like, if you told me I was going to have a starter with the bases loaded and he's got to get like 2+ outs, I'm going Ranger every single time over Wheeler, over Nola. And that might sound crazy because Wheeler's very good. It's not a knock on those guys, but it's just the demeanor that Ranger Suarez has on the mound. He is cool, calm, collected. Honestly, probably should be a Gold Glove winner, but still he's not available enough for those season-long awards. And Chris Sale, very deserving of the Gold Glove that he got in the National League. But Ranger Suarez could have been a nominee alongside Zach Wheeler and Chris Sale, but unfortunately just didn't pitch enough. And that's the thing with him. You got to worry about the long-term durability of a guy who at 29 has already missed a good amount of time throughout different years in his career, whether it's at the start, whether it's in the middle, whether it's at the end of the season, just kind of getting dead arm. And it seemed like Ranger Suarez got that dead arm at the end of the season. And yet he goes out against the Mets and absolutely shoves with the Phillies' backs against the wall. You got to feel really good about that performance from Ranger Suarez. And I think this is a season for Ranger Suarez that we should feel more good about than bad about. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't Wheeler where we just simply say, this guy's unstoppable, A++++. Like, no, that's not the evaluation for Ranger Suarez. But was it more positive than negative? Absolutely. So Ranger Suarez compared to expectations, right? And the one other thing you want to look at is the ERA, where it ended compared to past seasons. 3.46 ERA this past year. He had a 4.18 in 2023. He had a 3.65 in 2022. And then he had that 1.36 in 2021. But that was only in 106 innings. So in these seasons where he started more than 12 games, he only started 12 games in 2021. Remember, some of those innings were out of the bullpen, and that's a different style of pitching. He's had his best year ERA-wise this past season. So By expectations, I'm going to give Ranger Suarez, I'm going to give him an A minus. And you say that might sound high to you. I think you need to, if you think that's a high grade for Ranger Suarez, you need to think back to what he was at the start of the season. He was so darn good for like 3 months, like best pitcher in baseball type of stuff. And I know how it ended, but that's enough for me to say, compared to expectations, he was an A minus. Like, I'm good with that. Now, compared to the average major league pitcher, the other evaluation that we do now, a great suggestion from a listener, this is tough, right? Because I want to say I'm between B plus and an A minus simply because of the availability factor. I think I'll probably go A minus again just because Ranger Suarez, what he did in the postseason, adds to that, like that extra intangible of being in a big spot and the moment not being too big for you. I'll give him an extra small letter grade on that one. So I'm going to give him an A minus on both compared to other major league pitchers and compared to his expectations. And that's just on 2024. But that can drop off significantly if this is the guy that he is for his whole career. If these problems that plagued him in 2024 are career problems, we've got issues, but not issues enough to trade him. I'll tell you why. Ranger Suarez is absolutely not going anywhere this offseason as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But first, let's talk about our friends over at Select Quote. Listen to this. The World Series, Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing, teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. Doesn't that sound very important? Of course it is. Select Quote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. You got to go ahead and check it out. I mean, Select Quote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. I mean, you invest so much time to take care of yourself and to be the healthiest, best version of you. Well, Select Quote's exclusive policies can reward that effort. If you're in good health, they work with carriers that could get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million, no medical exam required, and these policies are more affordable than you think. They've got a lot of great options, so head to selectquote.com, and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/locked-on. Go to selectquote.com/locked-on today to get started. Again, that's selectquote.com/locked-on. Select Quote. They shop, you save. So I've seen this around, right? Ranger Suarez, could he be traded this year? Could the Philadelphia Phillies move him? And it's not necessarily because of performance, right? The big sticking point with Ranger Suarez is the contract. So he's currently arbitration eligible for 1 more year. So he'll be arbitration eligible for 2025. They'll figure out the figure. He made $5.05 million this past year. I'd imagine he's probably looking at around $6 in 2025. Maybe a little bit more than that. We will see. But bottom line is he's a free agent in 2026. And the logical step for the Philadelphia Phillies, right, would be when Aaron Nola came up this year, like the end of this year or when he became a free agent, rather, I should say. What did the Phillies do? They let him get to free agency. They went out and re-signed him. They worked the new contract, long-term deal. Great. The next guy after that was logically Zach Wheeler, who had been your kind of 1A to Aaron Nola's 1B or vice versa to that point. This year, clearly, he's a standalone one for the Philadelphia Phillies. It shows you all of that. But the next step was Zach Wheeler, whose contract would have been up at the end of this year. You never let him get to free agency. You sign him to the extension. Perfect. So you got those 2 guys locked down. Those are your 1 and 2 in the rotation, however you want to put it. Nola went first because he was a free agent. Wheeler never got there. The next logical step would have been, well, Rangers up after this year, or not after this year, after this coming year in 2025. You know what I mean? And he should be the next guy that you focus on getting the extension. But what did the Phillies do? They instead extended Christopher Sanchez partway through the season, and much deserved. I'm not saying like that was the wrong move. Christopher Sanchez is really, really good, and they got him at an absolute bargain based on the type of pitcher he can be. We're going to talk about that on Monday and why that extension looks smarter and smarter by the day by the Philadelphia Phillies. It's very similar to what another front office executive does a little bit further south in the country. But that's for Monday's episode, so tune in for the breakdown on that. But you jump Ranger Suarez, you go to Christopher Sanchez. I don't know exactly what that says, but I know that the order of operations are out of sync there. I would have taken care of Ranger Suarez because Christopher Sanchez had more years of arbitration eligibility. Take care of the guy that's coming up on a contract next, sign him to a deal, lock him down, and then you move on to the guy that you're going to have team control over longer, right? Take the bigger problems as they come and then get to the smaller ones. Seems to be logical, but the Phillies didn't do that. And a lot of people wonder, why didn't the Philadelphia Phillies do that? And it's a great question that I don't have an awesome answer for besides the questions about durability. And also, maybe the questions about payday. Christopher Sanchez was not at a point where he could argue for a lucrative deal. Now, when his contract comes up, if he continues to pitch like he did, he's going to get that. And now you avoid that by signing him to the contract. But Ranger Suarez was kind of already at a point where I think people saw him as a bona fide clear 3 in a major league rotation. Could be a 2 in the right rotation. Heck, if he pitches like he did at the start of the season, he could be a 1 a lot of places. But it's tough to do that with a guy that doesn't seem as durable as some other ace starting pitchers around baseball. But Ranger Suarez would have been more expensive than Christopher Sanchez, a harder contract to work out. And there's a chance that it was Ranger Suarez's side saying, hey, I kind of want to get to free agency. I kind of want to wait a little bit before I sign a deal because I think I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing over the next 2 years. And the first couple of months, it seemed like he was doing well to increase his value, and then it fell off a little bit. So it's a combination. I think it's a question about durability, but I also think it could be the player looking at his opportunity and saying, I could get really paid. I don't want to sign an extension right now with the Phillies because I don't want to sell myself short because I may only get an opportunity for one big contract, and I want to make as much money on that as I can. And you cannot fault Ranger Suarez for thinking that way if indeed he thought that way. But here's why the Philadelphia Phillies are not going to trade him. A lot of people saw this and they're like, well, if they didn't sign him to an extension, they went to Christopher Sanchez. Maybe he doesn't like it here. Maybe the Phillies don't like having him here. And I mean that in the margins. I'm sure Ranger Suarez is happy in Philadelphia. I'm sure the Philadelphia Phillies are happy with Ranger Suarez. But I mean enough to offer a lucrative long-term deal. Like that's more than just like. You could go out on a date with someone, but once you buy the ring, you really better love him. And I don't know if the Phillies are there with Ranger Suarez yet, and I don't know if he's there with the terms that they could potentially offer. And yet they're not going to trade him? Why? Well, it's simple. Because at the end of the day, your team is better with Ranger Suarez than they will be without. And you're not getting many better options than Ranger Suarez that you can just add to this team. There are not many clearly better available starters that you will get at the dollar amount that you will pay Ranger Suarez this year. There's no reason to trade him for the impending contract situation to potentially come, right? You might say, okay, well, you're not going to get any return if Ranger Suarez signs somewhere else. Okay, but do you want your best shot at the World Series this year? The best shot at the World Series for the Philadelphia Phillies is with Ranger Suarez remaining on this baseball team. And we saw this with Aaron Nola. We were talking all year before Aaron Nola hit free agency, saying, okay, well, you got to extend him or you don't want him back. You have to make this decision now because you don't want him to get to free agency to bump up the price. Let's get this deal done. It doesn't get done. We were talking about it in spring training last year. It never materialized. And the Phillies just sat there comfortably. And Dave Dombrowski said, hey, go to free agency, see what's out there. We'll try and match it. And they did. The Phillies have shown that they are comfortable letting pitchers get to free agency. Now, they didn't with Zach Wheeler, but Zach Wheeler is a bit of a different beast. Zach Wheeler is one of the top 5 pitchers in baseball right now. And that's a guy that you can't let get to free agency. But Nola was a guy Nola's good. He's a top 35 pitcher in baseball right now. Maybe a little bit higher than that. But that's a guy that you can let go to free agency. He's not going to get a $400 million deal. It's not going to happen. And not that Zach Wheeler would have gotten $400 million. But my point is, Aaron Nola was not the bona fide clear ace that Zach Wheeler is. So that made the Phillies more comfortable to let him get to free agency and match. And I think they're going to do the same thing with Ranger Suarez. I think they're going to get to a point where they just say, okay, find free agency. If we can bring you back, we can. If not, it happens. But the other thing you can't do, Andrew Painter's not a solution for Ranger Suarez, by the way. Anyone who thinks, well, we could trade Ranger And then Andrew Painter will come in. He'll be the 4, and Sanchez will be the 3, and then you'll find someone to be the 5. Andrew Painter is going to be on an innings restriction coming off Tommy John surgery recovery. Like, he's not ready to – he's never pitched at the major league level before. Ranger Suarez has not only pitched at the major league level, he's been very good at the major league level, and you're not going to find another guy for that dollar amount that gives you that type of production, even if it is for half a season. That's why the Phillies aren't trading him, because this coming year, 2025, the Philadelphia Phillies will not be a better team without Ranger Suarez than they will be with Ranger Suarez. And for that reason, you have to keep him on the team. You cannot trade him. You will not get closer to a World Series by doing that. And the Philadelphia Phillies, I believe, are not going to trade Ranger Suarez. So if you see any of that out there of like, could they look to move Ranger Suarez because the rotation's so strong and use him to add a bat or a bullpen piece? No, I don't think it's happening, folks. I don't think so at all. I think it's the right call by the Philadelphia Phillies. But coming up next, long term, is it the right call for Ranger Suarez to be a member of the Philadelphia Phillies? Is this the guy that he's always going to be? We'll have a discussion on it as we wrap up today's episode. Oh, you got to get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. It's super easy. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you don't have to do it in-game. You can do it before the game. You could bet futures months in advance. Say, I think this team's going to win the Super Bowl. I think this team's going to win the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup. You could go with all of the sports. Parlay those all together. You can do a bunch of stuff with FanDuel, and it's the perfect time of the NFL season. I am 14 of my last 16 NFL bets. 14-2 in my last 16. And I am a moron. If I can hit at that rate, that shows you this is the time of the year where you can make the best returns on betting NFL football. So go ahead and do it. And also, you'll get started with that $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So this conversation is weird with Ranger Suarez, right? Because you're doing a lot of projecting, and not the projecting that your girlfriend or wife yells at you about when you guys get in an argument. No, projecting out with baseball terms. You know what I mean. Ranger Suarez is a guy that has such talent, right? I love this guy as a pitcher. Like, if you could build a lefty and it wasn't like there was one requirement, he doesn't throw 102, you would build Ranger Suarez. You would build a guy who's unflappable, with great off speed, great command, keeps the ball in the yard, knows how to work hitters, can field his position, never, ever gets worried about a ball hit back at him, always makes the right decision on the mound. Like, you would build Ranger Suarez if you were building a left-handed, flamethrower. And Ranger Suarez doesn't throw slow, but his velocity isn't for example, he's not throwing a 100 anytime soon. But that's why it's so tricky, because at the same time, if you could build durability, you wouldn't build Ranger Suarez. He hasn't pitched to the level that you'd expect to. He's not a young kid anymore, right? I know I said 29, he's got a lot of time, but you're also at a point where you should be in your prime as a pitcher. And ability-wise, Ranger Suarez is. But every year there's something, whether it's an illness, whether it's a visa issue, which, I mean, that one's not injury-related, but still, whether it's back, forearm, dead arm, there's always seems to be something with Ranger Suarez that leads to him missing time during the course of a season. And that doesn't mean he's not a good pitcher, and that doesn't mean the Phillies can't keep him. But what that does mean is you should be very cautious about paying him long-term, big-time money, especially when you already have long-term, big-time money committed to Wheeler and Nola. Sanchez, you got him at a discount, so that's not really in the equation. But you have money committed a lot of spots if you're the Philadelphia Phillies. If you're going to make other big investments, I do believe if Ranger Suarez gets to free agency, he will be another large investment for the Philadelphia Phillies. You got to be absolutely sure. So the question is, will this be the guy that Ranger Suarez is for the rest of his career? Will he be he's very darn good when he's available, but he's going to throw 150 or some innings, and he's not going to throw enough to be a true ace, and he's going to trail off near the end of the season, and then you're going to have questions about him in the postseason. Now, it's easy to say, right? And I love the performance by Ranger Suarez, and I was defending Ranger Suarez. If you go back to podcasts talking about that game when Ranger Suarez was taking the mound against the Mets, or listen to me on the radio, it's like, I kind of got to believe in Ranger. He's unflappable. He's been big in the postseason before. The moment's never too big for this guy. Believe he's going to give you something good. And he did. He was unbelievable. So, like, that should say, well, in the future, if you have worries about Ranger Suarez on big stages, he's ready for the moment. But one game doesn't exactly prove that. And remember last year when he made the start against the Atlanta Braves in the NLDS, he only was trusted to go 3 innings, and then they went bullpen game with it. You can't really do that. You can't have a guy that's going to be your number 3 or number 4 starter. You need both those guys in the postseason where you don't know how available they're going to be. Ideally, you want 4 guys you can trot out there that can give you 6 or 7 innings. Maybe you have 1 or 2 guys, Wheeler, Nola, that can give you 8 or 9. But you're not really looking at Ranger Suarez as that guy right now. And is it unlucky again, or is it who he is? I don't think we have enough of a sample size to say this is who Ranger Suarez is. Remember, in 2021, he was partially a reliever, became a starter, only started 12 games. That wasn't based on availability. That was based on ability and the trust that they have in him. In 2022, he started, but he was okay. And remember, he got there late because of like visa issues and stuff that it worked through. So you looked at a situation where, all right, I don't know how Ranger Suarez is going to be long-term, and he didn't get the proper spring training, and then he ends up going to the bullpen in the postseason run because you have Noah Syndergaard, and you have someone else I can't remember who was on that team. Well, Zach Eflin pitched for that team, I believe, or maybe Bailey Falter made a postseason start. A lot of weird names there in the back end of the rotation. It's nice that the Phillies have what they have now. My memory is probably not serving me correct, but my point is you move him to the bullpen in 2023, you go ahead and you give him 3 innings in his first postseason start because you want to go to a bullpen game. In 2024, we have questions about dead arm. Like, at this point in his career, I don't think it's enough of a sample size to say, well, he's injury prone, he's never available at the end of the year. And the postseason success backs that point up to say, okay, when the moment's big, Ranger Suarez is going to give you great starts. There's nothing that he's done in the postseason that's disproven that. But it's a tough way to live. So do I think this guy, the great but not always available Ranger Suarez, not a full season worth of a great pitcher, Ranger Suarez, is that who he is? I don't think so. I still believe he has a high ceiling. I still think he can't be – I don't think he can be that guy in the first 3 months of this past season over a full year. Because that would make him legitimately – like he would have one of the greatest single seasons of all time if he did that. I don't think he's that guy. But is he a number 2 caliber pitcher at the major league level over the next couple seasons? Very well could be. I believe he could be that guy. And he's not going to be the 2 on this team. He's going to be the 3 or maybe even the 4, depending on how the team feels about Christopher Sanchez. So my answer to is this year the guy that Ranger will always be is, to me, no. But I'm using guessing on that. I'm using some inference to figure that point out. It's not as clear-cut as, well, Aaron Nola is up and down every year, so if he has a bad year, well, this is not always the guy he is. If Zach Wheeler had a down year, no, we have a lot of sample size to say, well, he's better than this. Christopher Sanchez, we don't really know what he is yet, so we can't really project. But, like, Ranger Suarez is the guy in the rotation where the argument could be made either way. You could say this dude is going to be an all-star caliber pitcher year in and year out. Or you could say, this dude is going to be good for stretches, and for other stretches, he's not going to be usable. And that's the double-sided sword. I almost said coin, but all coins are double-sided. Double-sided sword of Ranger Suarez. You can go ahead and stab with it, or you can be stabbed by it. And the Phillies have to balance out how they want to handle that with his contract coming up at the end of this year. But it's not time to move on from him. And he had a pretty darn good 2024 season. And if you disagree with the A- I gave him in both spots compared to his projections and compared to his peers, let me know in the comments, because I wonder if people are down on Ranger Suarez right now. But I'm not. I think he had a solid season. I think he had a tough stretch there for 2 months, and the team did as well. And I think in the postseason, he was really big for them. I'm excited to see what Ranger Suarez has in store in 2025, when I do believe he will continue to be a member of the Philadelphia Phillies. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us again. Monday, Christopher Sanchez. We're going to break that down. We're going to talk about the extension. We're also next week going to get into some rumors about who the Phillies could be targeting. Interesting trade target potentially has popped up from another National League team, and a guy that, well, he was a big piece for this team's postseason push this past year. We'll talk about who that is coming up this next week. But that's all for today's episode, so thank you so much for joining us. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure, again, you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that helps you out and helps me out. And I'll talk to you Monday on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.